I'll talk to customers. Hey, you're going to bring a crack team that's going to work on this generative project. I'm like, is it the folks that built the one you used?
Do you remember how many services were showing up on the management console?
I started right before EBS, if that gives you some context. Google's recent release is 500,000 IOPS on a volume, so you can tell how fast technology moves.
You worked at AWS, Google, heading one of the top services company. Fundamental cultural differences that you have seen.
I was utterly terrified. The ability to deliver outcomes for customers was going to have a huge gap because people seemed very relaxed. So I wrote down a list.
Surprisingly, Keynote by Thomas Kurian hardly any mention of these flagship products or services that evolved Google Cloud. It was squarely focused on generative AI.
Hybrid cloud as an issue for public cloud providers, increasingly important given the degree to which they are not in the lead.
How do you see the difference between the generative AI strategies of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google? Who has the advantage?
They also were able to capture a whole bunch of resources from the broader community. Neither Microsoft nor Amazon have a current
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of The Encounter, where we talk to senior leaders from the tech industry to get their unique perspectives and insights. Today's guest is Miles Ward, CTO of Sada Systems, an award-winning Google Cloud partner. So Miles worked at AWS and Google before joining Sada. Interestingly, Miles and we were at AWS at the same time, almost a decade ago. So Miles, it's great to have you on my show. Welcome. So Miles, while we were at AWS, do you remember how many services were showing up on the management console?
Well, I mean, I started right before EBS, if that gives you some context for when the cycle happened. I remember working hard with Rhett Dillingham on provision IOPS EBS to make it so that you could have more than 100 IOPS on a volume, which the Google's recent release is 500,000 IOPS on a volume. So you can tell how fast technology moves.
I still remember while I was preparing for the AWS interview, I read some of your white papers that you wrote.
Oh yeah. No, I spent a lot of time trying to. At the time, a solution seemed like paper was the right size and shape, and then it was repo, and then it was container, and as things mature now, it's like a chunk of Terraform code. So it'll be interesting to see what a solution looks like next year.
Awesome. So let me get started with this. So you worked at AWS, you worked at Google, and now you are heading one of the top services companies. So tell us the fundamental cultural differences that you have seen between AWS and Google.
Sure. I was utterly terrified when I started in at Google. After about the third or fourth day, I was like, I was very worried. I thought to myself, perhaps I've made a terrible, terrible mistake. It felt to me like a retirement village full of like happy, college kids that just wanted to hang out and have snacks. And so I was really worried that the pace of innovation and the ability to deliver outcomes for customers was going to have a huge gap because people seemed very relaxed and there was no like super high intensity meetings about what needed to get done in the next 7 minutes. So I wrote down a list, actually wrote it together with kind of a companion list with Lucas Carlson and Mir Tarkic from the Broad and Waze, respectively, of all the features that we thought were missing. At the time, GCP had less than 1,000th of the revenue of AWS and was missing a whole heap of services. And, I thought maybe this stuff would take 2 years or 2.5 years to get done. At Amazon, several of those features the critical ones had been processed in less than a year. And a year later, they were all done at Google. Roughly, if anything, maybe a slightly faster pace of completion of features on what, from what I could tell internally, was frankly like a much more complicated operational stack that provided a bunch of benefit, but certainly took more work to develop in. So what's going on? How is everybody relaxed and having long lunches and at a sort of cozy, comfortable place without managers yelling at them? And yet productivity is at least as high, if not higher. So I sat hard with that one and thought about it for a couple seconds and watched, you're reading white papers. I was reading white papers from kind of some of the early interviews between Eric Schmidt and Larry and Sergey as he tried to understand the company from the perspective of an outsider as the executive at Sun that came over to try and bring adult care and feeding. There's just an enormous amount of structural support inside of Google's technical systems and cultural systems to help people actually ship. And that, there are good sides and downsides to that. Google ships so much software and experimentation that sometimes they kill those things, right? There's another cultural difference between Amazon and Google Cloud. They've got a different approach to how to take on experimentation and how to sponsor new creativity. I also felt like there was a really marked difference in the power dynamics between organizations. So I had met a whole bunch of engineers on the AWS side working in the actual development of products. And those folks, they were a part of a super respected, hardcore, definitely hired at the top of their skill set. I thought in many cases certainly equivalent engineers at sort of equivalent pay bait on the Google side, but they were not powerful. The general managers or the product managers owned those products, were responsible for hiring and firing the engineers, had all of the budget control around, what was effectively a startup per AWS product. At Google Cloud, dynamics could not be more different. Product managers have almost no real structural power. They're storytellers and information gathering and sort of reporters for engineers who are in charge of the budget, who are in charge of what gets built, who are the only ones with access to sort of central materials. I really quickly figured out that the team I was going to build had to be on the engineering ladders, or we would never be able to really do anything. Where at Amazon, there were business people that did incredible stuff that had nothing to do with the sort of central engineering system. So I can't say, one is perfectly better than the other. I had a great time at both places and both have built absolutely enormous businesses. Google's gone from 1/1000th to 1/3 of AWS in the period of time that we're talking about. So certainly the catch up is real, and we'll see what the next decade takes for us.
Absolutely. So exactly 2 weeks ago, I met you at the expo area at Google Cloud Next.
Yeah.
So it's an incredible event. It was great to be in person, back to be in person at Moscone after almost 4 years. So what were your key takeaways from Google Cloud Next?
Sure. Quite a few. I mean, first, for me at least, it felt like, well, okay, we've made it through that pandemic thing. Everyone is here and the place is packed, and I didn't have a bunch of employees that are like, I think I'm going to skip this one because I'm a little concerned. The turnout was incredible. I think they had easily 15,000 people there. Now, there's another comparison with AWS, right? I think the most recent reInvent something like 80,000 people. So there's room to grow there, if only to get more engineers and more product folks into the context of what's being developed, which is some pretty incredible tech. I would say second thing for me that was a big takeaway. I mean, we already knew that Google had gone, not myopic, but monocular, only one eyeball looking out of the periscope at generative AI as the most critical initiative that's come down the technology world in quite some time. We've all been a part of various technology bubbles. It's going to be NoSQL. Oh, that's everything. And now we got to get serious about NFTs. Oh, we got to go ape about blockchain. Yeah, fine. This, what I'm watching on my side, at least for my company, is, I started now 4.5 years ago. There were about 100 employees at the time. And we had really done only a couple of SOWs for customers working on GCP. Now we are the largest GCP reseller, and it's not close. And have done 1,200 successful projects in just the last 2 years. So, but the beginning was slow, right? Like you're talking to customers, suggesting you can do this. I'm rolling up my sleeves, writing a bunch of weird half-baked stuff, like trying to make it so that that we can penetrate. And I track like how many SOWs are we issuing, how many are actually closing in those first months. And there are more of those by almost an order of magnitude in generative AI than there were in GCP from 4 years ago. So, okay, that has to have me start to think about like, one, what every other partner and the professional services team on the Google side and product managers are seeing in terms of adoption rate. I think the total scale today feels small, probably like cloud felt for you and I, 15 years ago. But it certainly seems that at least Google's analysis of the problem space says this is at least the size of cloud. And so if that's a, $250 billion market, well, we probably should put some resources against that opportunity and see what we can do to capture it. I also saw and frankly was pretty impressed by the degree to which partners felt very front and center at that event. Maybe different than the previous Google Next in 2019, where I had just sort of recently switched over, and the next before that in 18, where I helped announce Anthos. Those the partner expo center, the degree to which they were mentioned in literally every presentation that I saw, their presence in the room, you could sort of see people that were there. I think partners have clued into the opportunity. I think Google has clued into the opportunity with partners. I think there's some real momentum that's being grown there. And that can only benefit customers in an environment where I think all of these products are complicated enough that I have never heard from any customer that they don't want help.
Yeah. So it was generative AI all over, took the center stage.
On every surface, right? I mean, just and certainly there's plenty of hardware announcements. They got the new A3 types. They got HyperDisk out. They've got the dedicated connectivity. There's a bunch of the work around accelerating the data platform that you need to build generative was, I thought, on good display. BigQuery continues to be super high performance. They had great structural announcements there around the Big Lake model, where you have access delegation and a bunch of the security controls that customers are going to want. So, I think 161 distinct product announcements, which is quite a run at it. But certainly for us, the highlight pieces were pretty obviously on the generative side.
Absolutely. But having seen the evolution of Google Cloud in the last decade, Google Cloud's differentiating factor initially was all about cloud native, right? Of course, they invented Kubernetes and they were the first to go live on a public cloud. So cloud native was big, and then the data cloud was really big. Then came in Anthos, which eventually became Google Distributed Cloud. But surprisingly, my observation was that in the keynote by Thomas Kurian, there was hardly any mention of these flagship products or services that evolved Google Cloud. It was squarely focused on generative AI.
Sure.
And I couldn't find a mention of hybrid cloud or multi-cloud, which has been the theme for the last couple of years. So what's your view on that?
Well, I think hybrid cloud as an issue for public cloud providers is increasingly important given the degree to which they are not in the lead. Right? Like you'll note AWS doesn't say a lot about hybrid cloud and multi-cloud because they're number one. And I think there was a period of time where investments in Kubernetes, investments in the open source ecosystem around containerization of technology, one felt deeply differentiated. It certainly has produced incredible performance results for our customers, price performance results. But it also is certainly a spot now where I don't think Anthos really worked. Like the commercial price point was unattractive for effectively all customers, and and they weren't able to sort out the storage and software stack problems. Great, I can run containers, but I can't run Cloud SQL. Great, I can run containers, but I can't run BigQuery. They started to get to a place where they're solving some of those issues. BigQuery Omni is a totally incredible product. We have a bunch of customers that are taking advantage of that. I think we're excited about Dataflow Omni and GKE Omni and other kinds of building blocks. And that model where Google is responsible for running Anthos for you is maybe a little more tractable than expecting engineering teams and SRE teams at customers to stand up and operate what is inarguably a complicated product. The original user manual Chris Hendrick and I fought our way through was some 68 pages to turn one on, which is not what I would describe as Google's standard of ease of use. So I do think that the strategy from Google also is influenced by the degree to which Kubernetes seems to have landed. There's not a lot of argument that if you're going to build some kind of new service layer, that's what's going to end up being underneath it. Now, I also think, and we basically never recommend to customers that they should roll up their sleeves and kube control and get in there and write out some Helm charts from scratch and Cloud Run is so consistently superior in experience and price performance standpoint and operational, all of that is just hugely benefited. If you're going to run containers, I don't understand why you'd spend the additional cycles to get really deep on Kubernetes unless you intend to build a cloud provider or something like that, right? So that's I think the trajectory that things are going, where these feel like necessary enabling table stakes. Like identity and access management is extremely important, totally critical feature. Also was not in Kurian's keynote, right? It's just the necessary substrate that has to exist for these things to work. I think Kubernetes is a necessary substrate that has to exist for these kinds of things to work. And it sits behind Vertex, which is powering all of the generative AI work. It's how they're deploying a lot of these services as they work with customers. So I think it's okay if those things recede into the background.
So on that note, how do you see the difference between the generative AI strategies of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google? Who has the advantage?
So I think short-term first mover produces some real advantages. That's why they call it a first mover advantage. And so the folks at OpenAI have created this market by and large. And I think to incredible effect. There's no arguing that they have built a spectacular product. They also were able to capture a whole bunch of resources from the broader community, I think many of whom wanted to do so specifically competitively with Google, concerned that Google would just already win no matter what. Now, my view is that neither Microsoft nor Amazon have a current commercial existential need for generative technology. You're still going to buy, I don't know how many cardboard boxes Amazon is going to send me next week that do not depend at all on their ability to synthesize text from my prompt. And Microsoft will continue to sell terrible exchange licenses to companies that live in the dark ages long after they figure out how to get text to be generated. Google needs it or it will die. Like search is utterly changed by generative interfaces, maps, and the way that Android functions, and all of these businesses must have these capabilities. And as a result, Google's entire battleship, Alphabet's entire battleship, has pivoted around this issue, not only from a software standpoint, but from an infrastructure and technology standpoint, right? Like Inferentia is on its third iteration, if I'm keeping track of the news. TPU is on V5, versions matter. It turns out that they're radically higher performance devices today, in addition to being one of the largest consumers of NVIDIA gear and all of the downstream componentry required, which is to say nothing of the most important thing you need to build generative AI, which is data. Google has more data than everybody else combined. Exabytes and exabytes and exabytes that the OpenAI folks just do not have access to. They can hang out with Microsoft. They were talking about, we're going to start a web crawl. We should get some information from the internet. I'm like, boys, you are actually literally 25 years late. So
exactly.
I think in the midterm, not even the long term, I don't think this is a hard thing to move over. The outlying risk for Google in this is their willingness to do what has always been the risk to Google products. Can they invest enough human time to make the interfaces obvious and attractive to people and make it so that users have a clear and specific experience? They've done, they didn't screw up the way they screwed up with Anthos. The price point for this stuff is quite competitive. I think that is a combination of foresight and good thought on their standpoint and just a ridiculous cost profile advantage that comes from being gigantic. So I don't think that they're going to make that mistake. I think, right now GPT-4 produces some really high quality results because they have a lot of people reading those results and giving them feedback. And so my hope is that Google does a lot to invest in the feedback cycles that will help this stuff feel as natural as possible, which is maybe the only last impediment to a real structural advantage.
Right. So while we are talking about generative AI, as an SI, are you seeing customer traction? And if they are,
yes. So sorry to cut you off, but is there customer traction? Yeah. So we've done several hundred workshops in the last couple of months on the subject. We have dozens of paying customers working through the use of tools or working together with us on services projects. I remember there was a smart Googler who's like, we need your list of use cases. And I was like, okay, no problem. They are the use cases for English and for software. So, any blanks you want to fill in with that, you just go right ahead. Right. So I think our challenge today, a services business, becomes much lower risk and much, I think, easier to manage, given, an opportunity to do roughly the same thing for somebody else. We've gotten to a place now where we have done the classic, I don't like my AWS people, I want to move everything to GCP. We've done that literally hundreds of times. We've done the classic, I hate my data center, it's a terrible mountain of pain, can you move me to? Yes, we've done that hundreds of times. My terrible data warehouse sucks, can you move me on to BigQuery? Yeah, done that hundreds of times. The use cases are so diverse that they defy summary. We could spend the next 2 hours and I would just say a sentence that a customer is doing and they would never repeat ourselves and they would all be valuable and interesting. So there is some categorization emerging, like, how do I create content, whether that's text or, video or images or audio or every different media type. There's, how do I compress and expand, summarize and extrapolate? How do I use and become fungible and fluid with these media types? We have a lot of folks that are looking for trying to, sort of error correct and quality control and review and annotate. So metadata construction, enrichment kind of activities. And we have a lot of folks that are working really hard to augment their people. Think about these in terms of, advisors and counselors and teachers and mentors and all of those functions that I think all of us really benefit from. So what's great about it is we also haven't found one that's just been a total dud. Like, you'll go do, working with a company that underwrites mortgages, they receive hundreds of contracts a day that are terrible scans and photographs from, people's, iPhone 4 and, blurry images, and they can't fill out the forms right, and they put the wrong thing in the wrong cell all the time. And so they have, robotic process automation. They have people reading these things, trying to clean things up. The machine is materially faster and more accurate than they are today on V1. So, okay, any companies that have contracts? It's like, I know one or two, which is all of them. So, okay, there's one use case, right? Like we're working with the folks at Glowforge. They build a laser cutter that lets you, build designs like are in the background that of my view. It's too hard to use the cutter. You got to be good at Illustrator or some design environment. So now you use Stable Diffusion. You ask for what you want to draw, but it's not a single pass because the laser can't just cut anything out of thin air. It's got to actually conform to their rules. So now there's a Stable Diffusion and then a model that's tuned to produce cuttable images. And voila, now that's radically multiplied something like 50x the usage of their printer, which is like, it's mind blowing. So, okay, you got anybody that uses images? Like there are a few companies like that, right? I've seen a few. So it's, and certainly augmentation of software development is no small thing. I don't know of any company that doesn't want more of what they do to be automatic. And I think it's critical to recognize, while it's very attractive, we have a lot of customers who are like, do I have to write software anymore? Maybe I just build generative interfaces and talk them through doing all the integrations that I want and talk them through taking all the actions with APIs. I think one, there's maybe some cost impediment to that, but probably more importantly, binary software that can be tested and committed to source control and rigorously analyzed for vulnerabilities. That kind of software has a much lower operational and maintenance component than software that's built in generative tech. And so using generative to build a more robust, a more structurally stable chunk of software is probably a really safe and efficient way to operate.
Cool. Nice set of use cases. So one thing is seeing what customers are doing with generative AI, but as one of the top SIs, how does Sada intend to use generative AI?
Sure.
How do you exploit that?
Yeah, we are in production with 3 internal services built on generative that have saved us millions of dollars this year. So proprietary application components that assist in the process of delivery, they are patent pending at this time because they are that advantaged. And I think if your SI isn't talking about the degree to which they are changing internally as a result of these technologies, they are the wrong company for you to talk to. The rate of change is substantial enough that, and frankly, the barrier of entry to experimentation is low enough. Like, it's not like we assigned a team of 50 to go ape and sort this thing out, right? Like, Rick kind of built it in a long weekend, and it's amazing. So there's really there's more opportunity than I think most companies have actually been able to get to the risk tolerance to take on. And and I think that's just a sort of symptom of the current macroeconomic climate. And frankly, like, we're excited about it. One, because of the clear dividends it's produced internally. We expect it to have similar effect on our customers. But this is about the only place where customers are still reserving their innovation points or their investment in new tech kind of budget, because it's just black and white how big the financial positive effects are associated with this kind of technology.
Cool. So it's almost like eating your own dog food.
Oh, I have to do it, right? Like, and I'll talk to customers, and they're like, hey, you're gonna, bring a crack team that's gonna work on this generative project. I'm like, yep, absolutely. We've got a whole crew of people over here. They're like, is it the folks that built the one you used? And we'll go, yeah, sure. You can talk to them. Like, oh, that's amazing. That's what we want. I think there is I don't think it's like snake oil is the wrong word, right? There's certainly a lot of the application of this label to projects that don't really include it in any kind of material way. And I think the learning curve is not zero. You've got to dive in and figure out how this stuff works. And I think painfully for many companies, like I said before, the difference between building a POC, which can be startlingly fast and like compelling, is different than the actual amount of work to turn that into a rigorous production system. And so I think it's maybe easier in these kinds of technology pieces to be to feel maybe underwhelmed at the second phase or the third phase. So we're trying to avoid that by making sure that we make the right investments up front. But so far, success has been pretty minor.
Awesome. So finally, Miles, we discussed a lot about generative AI, but apart from that, as a CTO, what do you think are the big bets that you're going to make on technology apart from generative AI?
Sure. So, I mean, we've made about as big a bet on Google as you can possibly make. Currently, this is all public. We are their largest resale committed partner. We've signed up to sell $2.5 billion worth of public cloud through Google in just the next 3 years. We're ahead of that target, by the way. So, who knows what we'll renew to it as we take on the sort of next round of that piece. And a big part of orienting ourselves that way and having a clear perspective sets us up not to work with every customer, not to work with every project. Some places, they've got an enormous Microsoft estate and you've paid for licenses for the entire history of the business, and that's just how all your people are trained. We have customers that we have moved that look like that, but Microsoft made a much bigger investment in the training and matriculation and skills development of teams than I think Amazon ever did. They expected a small team would be hugely accelerated inside of most businesses and would run maybe the web part of their infrastructure, and I think struggled to crack into the IT department where Google has worked there with Workspace and all of the building blocks around search for a really long time. So my expectation is that the work that we're doing to align ourselves with Google's technologies pays quite a bit of dividends. We are also quite motivated. I think generative is going to be an incredibly important part of what happens, but the specific work that gets done by companies to make it applicable to their problems is almost always data engineering and thinking through things like how we're using, I get excited about, the demo I did at Next was asking Google to write SQL for me. I'm maybe a little more interested in having it write DBT for me, or having it write some of these more sort of narrower domain specific have it write data flow for me. Those kinds of tools I think are going to be really important in this next generation of, much higher return associated with successfully integrated data systems. We're spending a bunch of time looking at kind of governance tools and pieces that are making some of the operational behaviors of application development stacks feel a little more tractable. We're taking a close look at the folks at Harness. There's certainly, I think, a lot of interesting stuff happening as more and more open source moves into managed service. So we've got a lot of customers that are showing up as successful with Memento, as a managed Pelican cache, and now a vector database. So those vector database tools where I think you're going to get some balance of kind of cache oriented ones versus things like PG Vector running on top of the Postgres shim for Spanner or on AlloyDB. Those are certainly technologies where we think more and more of the solutions will depend on them over time. I would say we are spending less cycles, like we were talking about, in like raw, gnarly Kubernetes optimization. I'm certainly pulling engineers off of, what feels like bespoke integration code development, where you're just going to end up telling the computer to do that for you and having it write it out. So, and I think if we're going to make this much software this much easier to build, we got to get super serious about code review and code control and how do we manage and test deployments so that we don't ship something we didn't expect. So we're spending quite a bit of cycles there, but
Awesome.
No shortage of opportunity.
Absolutely. So we should actually do a deep dive on the Gen AI stack. So we'll have a special edition of this where we'll only focus on Gen AI use cases and what Google is doing and some of the services. So, but for this show, it's almost the last question of the discussion. So, Miles, thanks so much for joining me. It was great to meet you in person, and I never thought we would pull it off so quickly.
Yeah, no, this is an important conversation because I think a lot of business leaders are trying to figure out what's next and how to take advantage of the rate of change that we're a part of today. And so I'm hopeful that your audience is ready to jump in.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And we'll do a follow up soon.
Awesome, Johnny. Good to see you, bud.